My name doesn't matter as much as the date does. I lost my place in my own family on the morning of my 30th birthday in a hospital parking garage, holding a paper bag of bocals nobody would eat. I'd planned the whole thing for weeks. Not a party exactly. I'm too old and too tired for parties. But a brunch. My favorite place downtown. The one with the cracked tile floor and the owner who remembers. I like my coffee scalding. I'd booked the back table for 10. I'd told my mother 3 times, written it on the shared family calendar twice, and reminded my sister the night before. 30 felt like it should mean something. I wanted, just once, to sit at the center of a table instead of refilling everyone else's water. I was loading the car when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother to the whole family thread. Change of plans, everyone. Meet at Mercy General, 4th floor. Bring snacks if you can. Praying so hard right now. I read it 4 times. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. Then the follow-ups came in, fast, one after another, like hail on a tin roof. It was my sister. She'd checked herself into the ER at 6 that morning. Chest pains, she said. Couldn't breathe, she said. My mother's messages got more frantic with each line, and by the time I'd thrown the bagels in the passenger seat and driven across town, the whole clan had assembled in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and hand sanitizer. My aunt was there, 2 cousins, my grandmother, who I hadn't seen since Easter, clutching rosary beads. I want to be clear about something. If my sister had been actually sick, I would have driven faster. I would have prayed harder than any of them. I with her in the complicated way you love a person who has been hurting you so long that the hurt has become a kind of weather you just dress for. But I'd seen this exact production before. The first thing the nurse told my mother, the thing I overheard because I was standing close enough, was that all the tests had come back clean. Heart fine. Lungs fine. Blood work unremarkable. The doctor's working theory, delivered gently, was a panic attack, possibly stress-related, and they wanted to keep her a couple hours for observation before discharge. Routine. Nothing dangerous. My mother turned to the room and announced with tears in her eyes that the doctors were running more tests and that we should all stay close because family is what gets you through. Everyone nodded. Somebody started a prayer chain on their phone. And me, I stood there holding a bag of bagels, slowly understanding that my birthday had not been postponed. It had been swallowed. Nobody was going to mention it. Nobody had remembered to. I should tell you who my sister is because the rest of this won't make sense otherwise. She's 2 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she has been, in my mother's words, the sensitive one. Sensitive was the family code for a person whose feelings outweighed everyone else's by law. When we were kids, if my sister was sad, the whole house held its breath. If I was sad, I was told to set a good example. She got the bedroom with the window seat. I got the one off the kitchen where you could hear the refrigerator hum all night. When she didn't make the dance team, my mother organized a private coach. When I made the honor roll, my mother said, "Don't get a big head about it." I learned early that being the steady one came with a cost and visibility. I was praised for needing nothing, and the praise was a cage. So I got very, very good at needing nothing. I moved out at 18, put myself through nursing school working night shifts. I built a life 2 suburbs over and told myself the distance was about the commute. Before I tell you what happened in that hospital that turned everything and how a single afternoon ended up cracking my family open like an egg, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And tell me this too. Have you ever shown up for someone's emergency and slowly realized the emergency was a performance and you were just an extra in it? I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours. I watched my mother fuss. I watched her bring my sister, who was sitting up in bed scrolling her phone and laughing at videos, a smoothie from the cafeteria. I watched my grandmother slip her a folded 20 for the snacks. I watched my aunt stroke her hair and tell her how brave she was. And the whole time my phone sat warm in my pocket with the brunch reservation confirmation still open, the booking I hadn't canceled because part of me kept thinking somebody would say it. My birthday. Just once. Around noon, my sister looked up from her phone, scanned the room, and her eyes landed on the paper bag in my lap. "Are those bagels?" she said. "I'm starving." I handed her one. "What else do you do?" She ate it, brushed the crumbs off the blanket, and went back to her phone. My mother watched the whole thing with a soft, proud look, like I'd done something noble, like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking. That was the moment, if I'm honest, that something in me went quiet, not loud. People expect rage to be loud. Mine was the opposite. It was the silence of a switch being flipped in a house at the end of a long day, the click and then the dark. I excused myself to the bathroom. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went down to the parking garage and I sat in my car and I called the restaurant and canceled the table for 10. And then I sat there for a while in the gray concrete light, and I did not cry. I want you to know I did not cry. I was past it. That's where I would have left it. I'd left it before 100 times, driven home, made myself a sad little dinner, told nobody. But 3 things happened that afternoon that I couldn't leave alone. The first was that, on my way back up, I passed the discharge desk and overheard the nurse again, this time on the phone, confirming my sister's release for 2 o'clock and noting in a slightly tired voice that this was the patient's 4th visit this quarter for the same complaint. 4th, I'm a nurse. I know what that pattern usually is, and it usually isn't the heart. The second was that when I came back into the waiting room, my mother was on the phone with my father, who travels for work and was in another state. And I heard her say, No, don't fly back. It's not that serious. The doctors are just being careful. I've got it handled. I always do." And then lower, almost to herself, "Your other daughter's here too, somewhere. Your other daughter's somewhere. Your other daughter somewhere." The third thing was the smallest, and it was the one that did it. My grandmother, who is 86 and forgets a lot now, reached out and caught my wrist as I sat down beside her. She looked at me with these watery, searching eyes and she said, "Sweetheart, whose birthday was it?" "Somebody told me there was a birthday today." I said, "It's mine, Gran." And she smiled this enormous, delighted smile and said, "Well, isn't that wonderful? We should do something." And nobody else in that room turned around. I drove home that night and I did not make a sad little dinner. I sat at my kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I started writing. Not a confrontation, not a speech. Just the truth, an order, the way you'd chart a patient. The window seat, the honor roll, the dance coach, the bedroom off the kitchen, the 20 visits to the ER I'd lost count of over the years, each one perfectly timed to land on a weekend, a graduation, a Thanksgiving, my engagement dinner 2 years back that nobody made it to because my sister had a spell. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the engagement, because it matters. His name was a kind man's name. And I'm not going to give it to you, because he doesn't deserve to be dragged into this. But I'll tell you, he proposed to me on a Tuesday in a botanical garden, and I said yes, and I was happier than I'd been in my whole adult life. We planned a small dinner to tell my family, 12 people, and 40 minutes before, my sister called my mother, sobbing, saying she felt faint, and the entire dinner relocated to her apartment. And my engagement was announced to a room full of people fussing over a woman lying on a couch with a cold compress on her forehead, occasionally peeking out to ask if anyone had refilled her ginger ale. He left 8 months later. He never said it was about my family. He said it was about me, about how I'd disappear whenever they called, how I'd cancel our plans to drive across town for a crisis that always evaporated by the time I arrived. He said, and this is the part that stuck a knife in me, I can't marry someone who's still auditioning for a part that was never going to be cast. I told him he didn't understand. I told myself he didn't understand. It took me 2 more years and a hospital parking garage to admit he understood perfectly. So there I was, the night of my 30th birthday, writing it all down. And the more I wrote, the more I saw it wasn't random cruelty. It was a system. a machine my mother had built and my sister had learned to run, where attention was the only currency and the only way to earn it was to be in crisis. My sister wasn't a villain in some movie. She was a girl who'd figured out, at maybe age 4, that the only time the whole house turned toward her was when she was falling apart. So she never stopped falling apart. She'd made a career of it. And it had cost her too, I'd see that later, but right then all I could see was the bill it had cost me. The next morning I called my father. He was still out of state. I caught him at his hotel before a meeting. I told him everything I'd written down in order, calm, no crying, the way you deliver hard news to a family in a waiting room. I told him about the 4th visit this quarter. I told him your other daughter, somewhere. I told him about the engagement dinner, and there was this long silence on the line, the kind that has weather in it, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I know." I said, "You know?" He said, "I've known for a long time." I told myself you were the strong one, that you'd be fine, that your sister needed your mother more. It was easier to be the one who traveled than the one who stayed and watched it happen. He paused. "I'm sorry. I owed you a childhood where somebody noticed you and I sent your mother a check and got on a plane instead. I didn't know what to do with an apology I'd waited 25 years for." I held the phone and I looked out my kitchen window at the gray morning and I felt the floor of my whole life shift a few inches to the left. "Dad," I said, "I need you to do one thing. Anything. I need you to not warn them. I'm going to say all of this. To everyone. At once. And I need to do it without your mother getting a head start on the story. Because that was the trick, see? That was always the trick." My mother controlled the narrative the way a conductor controls an orchestra. By the time I ever said anything was wrong, she'd already explained to the whole family why I was being dramatic or ungrateful or jealous. She got there first. Every time. The only way to be heard was to not give her the chance to translate me before I'd spoken. My father was quiet, and then he said, "Sunday dinner. She's hosting Sunday dinner this weekend for your sister's recovery. Everyone'll be there. Your grandmother, your aunt, the cousins." Another pause. "I'll fly back. I'll be in the room. You won't be alone in it. I want to tell you I felt powerful. I didn't. I felt sick. I spent the next 4 days feeling sick, rehearsing in my car, deleting and rewriting the things I wanted to say, lying awake doing the thing you do where you imagine every way it could go wrong. What if they laughed at me? What if my mother started crying and turned the whole room against me, made it about her broken heart the way she always could? What if my sister had a spell right there at the table and stole it, the way she always did? That was the fear that woke me at 3 in the morning. Not that I'd be wrong. That I'd be right and they'd take it from me anyway. Sunday came the way. Sunday came the way Sundays do. Indifferent to everything. My mother's house smelled like pot roast and lemon furniture polish, the smell of my entire childhood. My sister was installed in the good armchair with a throw blanket over her legs, a queen recovering from a battle she'd never fought. My grandmother was on the couch. My aunt was setting the table. My 2 cousins were in the kitchen pretending to help. And my father, who'd flown in that morning and hadn't told my mother why, stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, and when I walked in, he caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. Just enough. We sat down to eat. My mother said grace and she thanked God for healing my sister, and she squeezed my sister's hand and my sister gave a brave little smile, and I felt that old familiar pull to make myself small, to refill the water glasses, to be the steady one. And then I set my fork down. "Before we eat," I said, "I have something to say. And I need everyone to let me finish, because I've spent my whole life not finishing, and I'm done with that." The table went still. My mother's smile froze in place. "Yesterday was 4 days after my 30th birthday," I started. My voice shook and I let it. "Does anyone here know what we did for it?" Silence. My aunt looked at her plate. One of my cousins looked at the other. "I'll tell you." I sat in a hospital waiting room for 3 hours, holding a bag of bagels, and the only person who remembered it was my birthday was Gran. who also forgets what year it is. Now hold on, my mother started, that warm, reasonable tone already gathering, the tone that had turned me into the unreasonable one 1,000 times. Your sister was in the hospital. She had a panic attack, Mom. I said it flat. I'm a nurse. I talked to the discharge nurse. Heart clean, lungs clean, blood work clean. It was her 4th visit this quarter for the same thing. I turned to my sister, who had gone very pale. And I'm not saying that to be cruel. A panic attack is real. It's frightening. I believe you were scared. But it wasn't a heart attack, and it wasn't an emergency that justified the whole family abandoning my birthday. And we both know it isn't the first time something just happened to fall apart on a day that was supposed to be about somebody else. That is not fair, my mother snapped. And there it was, the pivot. Do you know what it's like to have a child who suffers like she does? Do you have any idea what I carry? I do, actually, I said, because I carried it too. I just never got to lie down. My father spoke then, and the whole table turned, because he so rarely did. Let her finish, Carol. My mother looked at him like he'd slapped her. He'd never once in 30 years taken a side against her in that room. So I finished. I laid it all out in order, calm as I could keep it. The window seat and the bedroom off the kitchen, the honor roll, the dance coach, the engagement dinner that became a vigil for a fainting spell that resolved the moment the announcement was over. I told them about the man I'd almost married and what he said about auditioning for an uncast part. I told them I'd spent my entire life being praised for needing nothing, and that the praise was just a quieter way of telling me I didn't matter as much. And then I said the thing I'd written at the very bottom of my list, the thing I'd been most afraid to say. I turned to my sister. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you were a little kid who learned that the only way to be loved in this house was to be in pieces. And I think Mom built that, because Mom learned the same thing from somewhere, and round it goes. I'm not angry at you. I'm grieving you. There's a difference. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. The same hum from my childhood bedroom. And then my sister did something I did not expect. She started to cry. Not the performance cry, the one with the cold compress and the peeking. A real one, ugly and silent, her face crumpling like a child's. And she said in this small, wrecked voice, I don't know how to be okay. Every time I try to just be normal, nobody calls. Nobody checks on me. I have to be dying to get anyone in this family to look at me. And my mother, who'd been gearing up to defend her, went still. Because that was the whole machine, said out loud, by the person it had been built around. The favored child confessing that the favor was a prison too, that she'd never learned to be a person, only an emergency, that the spotlight she'd stolen from me her whole life had also burned her alive. I'm not going to pretend the room turned into a Hallmark movie. It didn't. My mother got defensive again, then tearful, then quiet. My aunt left early, uncomfortable. One cousin texted me later that night to say she'd seen it for years and never known how to say so. My grandmother, bless her, mostly just ate her pot roast and at one point patted my hand and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," and I almost lost it right there, but something had cracked. You can't unsay a thing like that at a table full of people. The story my mother had spent 30 years narrating had, for once, gotten away from her. In the weeks after, things came apart and then, slowly, came back together in a different shape. My parents went to counseling. My father, it turned out, had been quietly miserable for years, and the fight they had after that dinner was apparently the most honest conversation of their marriage. They didn't split. They got, of all things, closer. Once he stopped using distance as a way to avoid choosing. He calls me now. Every Sunday. He didn't for 30 years and now he does, and we don't always have much to say, but he calls. My sister, this is the part I think about most, went to therapy, a real therapist, not the kind my mother would have hired to confirm she was special, and she did the hard, unglamorous work of learning to be a person who is not on fire. She got a job. A boring, steady, Beautiful job in an office with fluorescent lights. The first time she called me just to talk, no crisis, no spell, just to ask how my week was, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot and cried because it was the conversation I'd wanted with her for 28 years. We're not best friends. We may never be. But last month she texted me on a Tuesday, no reason, and said, "I'm sorry it took me 30 years to wonder if you were okay. Were you? Are you?" And I wrote back, "Getting there." And I wrote back, "Getting there." And I meant it. My mother and I are the hardest part, and I won't lie to you and say we fixed it. We didn't. Some things you don't fix. You just set down. She apologized, eventually in her way, which was indirect and full of explanations, and I accepted it in my way, which was without pretending it erased anything. We talk. We're careful with each other. I go to dinner sometimes and I leave when it stops being good, and I no longer cancel my own life to drive across town for a crisis that will be over before I park. The first time I let one of her emergency calls go to voicemail and finished my own dinner first, my hands shook the whole time. The second time was easier. By now it's just a thing I do. I turned 31 last week. I made the brunch reservation again. Same place, cracked tile, scalding coffee. This time I told no one it was a test, because it wasn't one anymore. My father came. My sister came, and she brought a card she'd actually picked out, and inside she'd written something that made my throat close up. 2 of my cousins came. My grandmother came and asked 3 separate times whose birthday it was, and 3 separate times I told her it was mine, and 3 separate times she lit up like it was the best news she'd ever heard. And I decided that was the only reaction I needed. My mother didn't come. She had a headache. Old habits. But you know what? The table wasn't empty. It was full of the people who chose to look at me. And I sat at the center of it for the first time in my life, and I let them. Here's what I've learned, and then I'll let you go. The child who gets overlooked grows up believing she has to earn the right to take up space, and the child who gets all the attention grows up believing she'll vanish the moment she stops performing. Both of them are starving at the same table. The favoritism doesn't feed one and starve the other. It starves them both, just in different directions. I spent 30 years thinking the cure was to need less, to be smaller, to be the steady one who asked for nothing. The cure was the opposite. The cure was to stand up at the table and say out loud, in front of everyone, "I am here. I have always been here, and I am done waiting for you to notice." So let me ask you, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you're watching, in your family, are you the one in the spotlight or the one in the shadow? And if you're the one in the shadow, the one who spent your whole life being praised for needing nothing, what would happen? What would really happen if this week you set your fork down and said the thing you've never let yourself finish? Tell me. I'll be reading. The hardest thing to accept is that nobody in that hospital waiting room woke up that morning planning to erase me. There was no villain twirling a mustache. There was only a machine my mother built out of her own fear. A machine my sister learned to run before she was old enough to know she was running it. And a machine I kept oiling for 30 years by being the steady one who asked for nothing. Every choice fed the next. My mother gave attention only to crisis, so my sister manufactured crisis. So I learned to disappear. So the engagement collapsed. So a parking garage on my 30th birthday became the place where I finally counted the cost. Cause and effect. Link by link. All the way down. What broke the chain wasn't anger. Anger I'd had for years and it changed nothing. What broke it was the decision to tell the truth cleanly, in order, in front of everyone, without letting Carol get there first, to translate me into someone dramatic. That took something I didn't know I had. It took the nerve to set my fork down and keep my voice steady while my whole body wanted to shrink back into the chair off the kitchen. And it took the harder thing, the willingness to look at my sister and choose not to destroy her, to say I'm grieving you, not hating you, even while she'd spent our whole lives stepping on me to be seen. I think a lot now about how easy it would have been to confuse honesty with cruelty that night. I could have humiliated her. I had the receipts. The wisdom, if I earned any, was in knowing the difference between exposing a truth and detonating a person. A truth told to free yourself is medicine. The same truth told to wound is just the old machine running in a new direction. I wanted out of the machine, not a turn at the controls. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Doing the right thing and doing the smart thing and doing the brave thing are usually the same thing, wearing different clothes, and they almost always feel terrible in the moment. Telling my father not to warn anyone felt like betrayal. Letting my mother's emergency call go to voicemail while I finished my own dinner made my hands shake for an hour. Sitting down at that brunch a year later and letting people choose to look at me instead of testing them took more courage than the confrontation ever did. You don't fix a family like mine in one dinner. You don't fix some of it ever. But you can stop being the person who keeps it running on your own quiet. You can decide that loving someone doesn't mean vanishing for them. You build a new table, you sit down at the center of it, and you let the people who choose you fill the chairs. The empty seat where my mother should have been didn't ruin my 31st birthday. It just told me, finally, who was willing to show up.